Drive faster! Keep moving!
3 months earlier, he commanded an army of over 100,000 men. He ruled from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River. He was called King of Kings, Shahanshah, a title that meant, quite literally, that every other king on earth answered to him. Now he was a prisoner of his own men. The empire that Cyrus the Great had built 200 years earlier, the first empire in history to govern dozens of different peoples, languages, and religions under a single administrative system, was about to end. Not in a final, glorious battle. Not in the throne room of Persepolis. But on a dusty road in the mountains, betrayed by his own satrap, abandoned by the empire he was born to rule. With the army of a 25-year-old Macedonian king closing in from behind. This is the story of the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. How it was built. How it ruled half the known world for 2 centuries. And how, in less than a decade, it ceased to exist. At the hands of an enemy that should never have been able to beat it. To understand how the Persian Empire fell, you first need to understand exactly what was falling. Because by any measure available to the ancient world, it should not have been possible. At its height under Darius the Great, around 500 BC, the Achaemenid Persian Empire controlled approximately 5.5 million square kilometers. It governed an estimated 40 to 50 million people, by some estimates, as much as 44% of the world's entire population at the time. No empire before it had ever governed so many different peoples under one administrative system. The Persians invented something the ancient world had never seen, an empire that ruled through tolerance rather than erasure. Conquered peoples kept their religions, their languages, their local customs, their local governors, so long as they paid tribute and acknowledged the King of Kings. The Persian system of satrapies, provincial governors answering to the central crown, allowed an empire of unprecedented scale to function without constant rebellion. Herodotus, the Greek historian, no friend to Persia, wrote with grudging admiration about the speed of the Persian messenger system. A message could travel from Susa to Sardis, over 1,500 miles, in roughly 7 to 9 days. By comparison, a single traveler making the same journey would take 3 months. Its military was equally formidable. The Immortals, the king's elite guard, always maintained at exactly 10,000 men. The moment one fell, another immediately took his place, so the unit's strength never visibly changed. A symbol, and a reality, Persian power that did not diminish, did not weaken, did not show its losses. This was the empire that had defeated Babylon, conquered Egypt, absorbed the Lydian kingdom, and pushed its borders to the edge of India. This was the empire that, 200 years before our story begins, even Greece, divided, outnumbered, overwhelmed, had barely managed to survive against. By every measure that mattered in the ancient world, territory, population, wealth, administrative sophistication, military tradition. The Persian Empire of 334 BC was not just powerful. It was, by any reasonable calculation, unbeatable. And then a 22-year-old king from a kingdom most Persians had never heard of crossed the Hellespont with fewer than 50,000 men. Empires that last 2 centuries do not fall from a single weakness. They fall from the accumulation of small ones, each individually survivable, together fatal. The century before Alexander's invasion had been brutal for the Achaemenid royal house. Artaxerxes III had seized the throne by eliminating nearly every other member of his own family with a claim to it, brothers, half-brothers, potential rivals, removed systematically to secure his position. He was, in turn, poisoned by his own chief minister, a eunuch named Bagoas, who then placed a puppet king on the throne, and poisoned him too when he proved insufficiently obedient. By the time Darius III, a distant relative of the royal house, with no direct claim to the throne, was placed in power, the office of King of Kings had been reduced, in practice if not in title, to whoever could survive the palace. Darius III was, by most contemporary accounts, not incompetent. He had a respectable military record. He had personally killed a rival in single combat to win royal favor years earlier. He was not the weak, cowardly figure that later Greek and Roman propaganda, written by the victors, would portray him as. But he inherited an empire whose structural weaknesses had been quietly accumulating for generations. Satraps in distant provinces had grown increasingly autonomous, some maintaining private armies that answered more to regional interest than central command. The court was riddled with factions still recovering from a decade of assassination and counter-assassination. And the empire's military, once built on the Persian and Median core that had conquered the known world, now relied heavily on Greek mercenaries, men whose loyalty was a transaction, not a conviction. This is the empire Darius III inherited. Vast, wealthy, ancient, respected, and quietly, structurally, dangerously fragile in ways that 2 centuries of success had allowed everyone to ignore. It would take exactly one outside shock to reveal how fragile. To Persia, Macedon barely registered. A backwater kingdom on the fringe of the Greek world. Useful, perhaps, as a buffer against Greek unity, Persian gold had spent decades funding wars between Greek city-states specifically to keep them from ever uniting against Persia. What the Persian court did not fully appreciate, until it was far too late, was that Philip II had spent 2 decades building something Greece had never produced. Not just an army. A weapon system. The Sarissa phalanx, infantry armed with pikes nearly twice the length of traditional Greek spears, creating a wall of points that no conventional infantry could penetrate. The companion cavalry, heavy shock cavalry trained to deliver decisive blows at exactly the right moment in a battle, rather than simply harass and skirmish. When Philip was assassinated in 336 BC, many in the Greek world, and likely many in the Persian court, assumed his unproven 20-year-old son would struggle to hold even Macedon together, let alone anything beyond it. They were wrong. Within 2 years, Alexander had secured Macedon, crushed a rebellion in Thebes with devastating finality, and confirmed his authority over the Greek city-states his father had subdued. And then he did something that should have terrified the Persian court far more than it apparently did. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed into Asia. With an army of approximately 35 to 40,000 men. Against an empire that could, in theory, field hundreds of thousands. Persian commanders in the region were not unaware of the threat. One veteran satrap, Memnon of Rhodes, himself Greek, fighting for Persia, proposed a scorched earth strategy: retreat, burn the land behind them, deny Alexander supplies, let logistics defeat him before a single major battle was fought. The local Persian satraps rejected the plan. Partly out of pride, refusing to burn their own wealthy territories without a fight. Partly out of confidence, they had defeated Greek armies before, why should this one be different? At the Granicus River, the local Persian forces engaged Alexander directly. And lost. Decisively. It was the first warning. The Persian court, 1,000 miles away in Persepolis and Susa, did not yet understand what it meant. After Granicus, Alexander continued his advance through Asia Minor, liberating Greek cities, securing the coastline, denying the Persian navy its harbors. Darius III, finally recognizing the seriousness of the threat, assembled a massive royal army and marched to confront him personally. And then Darius made the first of several decisions that would prove catastrophic. He chose to meet Alexander at Issus, a narrow coastal plain hemmed in by mountains and sea. It was a catastrophic tactical error. The narrow terrain meant that Darius's enormous numerical advantage, the single greatest asset the Persian Empire possessed, was rendered almost meaningless. There was no room to outflank, no room to encircle, no room to use the empire's vast manpower as anything more than a crowded mass. Alexander, with the tactical instincts that would define his entire career, identified the Persian king's own position in the line and drove his heavy cavalry directly at it. Not at the army's flank. Not at its weakest point. At Darius himself. As Macedonian cavalry closed on the royal position, Darius's nerve broke. He fled the battlefield. He abandoned his chariot, too conspicuous, too slow, and escaped on horseback, leaving behind his shield, his bow, his royal cloak. And his family. Darius's mother, his wife, and his children were captured. The King of Kings had run from the battlefield and left his own family in enemy hands. Alexander, notably, treated the captured royal family with considerable respect, a calculated act of magnanimity that did as much damage to Darius's authority as the military defeat itself. Because now there was a story spreading through the Persian Empire. Not just that Darius had lost a battle, but that the enemy king had behaved more honorably toward the Persian royal family than the Persian king had behaved toward his own people, when he fled and left them behind. This is the moment the Persian Empire's fall truly begins. Not at Issus itself, but in what Issus revealed. That the King of Kings could be made to run. After Issus, Darius did everything a competent ruler should do. He raised a new army, even larger than before, drawn from every corner of the empire's vast territory. Bactrian cavalry. Indian war elephants, the first time these creatures had ever been deployed against a Western army. Scythed chariots, designed specifically to break infantry formations. He chose the battlefield himself this time, a vast open plain near GAUGAMELA, deliberately leveled and cleared to maximize the advantage of his chariots and his overwhelming numbers. This was the battle Darius had wanted at Issus. Open ground. No excuses. The full weight of the Persian Empire against a Macedonian army that, even after reinforcements, numbered perhaps 47,000 men against a Persian force that ancient sources claimed was several times larger. By every conventional measure, this should have been the battle that saved the Persian Empire. And then Alexander did something that should not have worked. He advanced his line obliquely, at an angle, drawing Persian forces away from their center to engage his stretched flank. As the Persian line extended to match him, a gap opened in their formation. Alexander saw it. And did what he had done at Issus. He drove the companion cavalry directly through the gap, straight toward the King of Kings himself. For the second time, Darius found himself facing the direct, personal target of Alexander's attack. And for the second time, he fled. This is the detail that history rarely emphasizes enough. When Darius fled GAUGAMELA, the battle was not yet lost. His general Mazius was achieving genuine success on the Persian left. Parts of the Persian army were fighting, and in places, winning. But an army's cohesion depends on the presence of its command. When word spread that the King of Kings had fled the field for the second time against this enemy, the army that remained, however well it was fighting, began to dissolve. GAUGAMELA was not lost on the battlefield. It was lost in the moment Darius decided, for the second time, that his own survival mattered more than his army's cohesion. He would never command an army against Alexander again. What happened next reveals everything about how thoroughly Darius's authority had collapsed. Babylon surrendered without a fight. Susa, one of the four great Persian capitals, surrendered without a fight. The treasuries of the empire, accumulated over 2 centuries of tribute from 50 million people, fell into Alexander's hands almost entirely intact. Persepolis, the ceremonial soul of the empire, burned. Whether by deliberate act of symbolic revenge for Xerxes's burning of Athens a century and a half earlier, or by drunken accident during a celebration, historians still debate. What is not debated is what it meant. The physical heart of Achaemenid power, gone. And Darius, the King of Kings, the man whose presence was supposed to be the unbreakable center of the entire imperial system, was fleeing eastward, with a shrinking circle of followers, toward the only thing he had left. Time. Among those still traveling with him was Bessus, satrap of Bactria, a distant relative of the royal house, commander of a significant remaining force. A man who had watched his king flee 2 battles. A man who had begun to calculate. As Alexander's pursuit continued, relentless, exhausting his own army to maintain the chase, Bessus and a small group of fellow conspirators made their decision. If Darius could be captured and presented to Alexander, perhaps mercy could be bought. If Darius died resisting capture, perhaps Bessus himself could claim the throne and rally Persian resistance under new leadership. In July 330 BC, Bessus and his co-conspirators seized Darius. The King of Kings, Shahanshah, ruler of the largest empire in the ancient world, was now a captive of his own satrap. Alexander, learning of the betrayal, pushed his cavalry harder than at any point in the campaign, riding through the night, abandoning slower units, desperate to capture Darius alive. He nearly succeeded. As Macedonian cavalry closed on the wagon, Bessus and his fellow conspirators made their final choice. They stabbed Darius and left him to die, abandoning him on the road as they fled deeper into the eastern provinces. According to the accounts that survive, Darius III, King of Kings, ruler of an empire that had once governed half the known world, died alone on a dusty road, found by an enemy soldier, asking for water. Alexander arrived minutes too late. Alexander reportedly covered the body with his own cloak and ordered a royal burial, a final, calculated gesture toward a man whose throne he had now, in every meaningful sense, inherited. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, 220 years old, the first empire in history to govern dozens of peoples under a single administrative system, the empire that had once nearly conquered Greece itself, ended not in a final apocalyptic battle, not in the burning of every city, but in a betrayal, on a dusty road, by men who had simply stopped believing their king was worth dying for. We tend to tell this story as a tale of military genius. Alexander the Great, the brilliant young conqueror, defeating an empire many times his size through superior tactics and audacious courage. And that story is true. But it is not the whole story. Because Alexander did not defeat the Persian Empire with superior numbers. He never had them. He did not defeat it through longer endurance. His own men, by the end of the campaign, were exhausted, mutinous, desperate to go home. He defeated it because at the two moments that mattered most, Issus and GAUGAMELA, the King of Kings made the same catastrophic choice twice. He chose his own survival over his army's cohesion. And in an empire built entirely around the person of the king, where loyalty flowed not to institutions, not to a constitution, not to a shared civic identity, but to a single individual sitting on a single throne. That choice was fatal in a way it would never have been for Rome, or for Athens, or for any system built on something larger than one man. When Darius fled Issus, his soldiers learned that the King of Kings could run. When he fled GAUGAMELA, they learned it was not an accident. And when Bessus and his conspirators finally decided to abandon him on that mountain road, they were not betraying an empire. They were simply making official what the army had already concluded on two separate battlefields, 2 years apart. That this king was no longer worth dying for. This is the warning the fall of Persia carries across 23 centuries. Empires do not only fall to stronger enemies. They fall when the people inside them, the soldiers, the satraps, the citizens, quietly, individually, one decision at a time, stop believing the center is worth protecting. The Persian Empire did not die on a single day. It died across 2 battlefields and 1 mountain road. Each moment small enough to seem survivable. Together, fatal. Empires rarely die in one day. They decay quietly. One fled battle. One broken loyalty. One abandoned king at a time. Until one morning, the world wakes up. And the center that held everything together simply isn't there anymore.